Morgan Freeman walked into a fancy bank to cash a check, expecting respect. Instead, he faced doubtful looks and dismissive words. The bank manager, judging him by his skin color, saw a black man instead of a valued customer. But what the manager didn't know was who Morgan Freeman really was. What happened next left everyone in the room speechless. Before continuing this amazing story, let us know, where are you watching from today? Everton Grand Bank was more than just a financial institution. It was a fortress of exclusivity, a place where the wealthy didn't just store their money, they displayed their status. The air inside was thick with quiet authority, the kind that came with old money and inherited power. Polished marble floors stretched endlessly, reflecting the golden glow of grand chandeliers overhead. The walls were adorned with custom artwork, abstract pieces that whispered sophistication but screamed wealth. The scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air, blending with the rich aroma of freshly brewed espresso from the executive lounge. Here, money wasn't just managed, it dictated the rules. At the center of this world stood Rick Gallagher, the bank's manager. Rick was the kind of man who thrived in places like this. In his mid-40s, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. His navy blue suit was tailored to perfection, silver cufflinks glinting under the chandelier's light. His hair, slicked back with precision, was a testament to his belief in control. He didn't need to raise his voice to command authority. His power lay in subtle dismissals, the way he glanced at people and made silent judgments in seconds. A single rule governed his world: appearances matter. And in this temple of wealth, respect wasn't given. It was measured, weighed, and judged. Rick prided himself on reading people. He could tell in an instant who belonged and who didn't. That's why, when the bank doors swung open and a tall, older man stepped inside, Rick barely spared him a glance. The man's clothes were neat but modest. An old but well-maintained jacket, polished shoes that had clearly seen years of wear. He carried himself with an effortless grace, his deep brown eyes holding a quiet wisdom. But none of that mattered to Rick, because this man didn't look like wealth. And in Rick's world, that meant he was a nobody. As the man walked past the marble columns, some of the wealthier clients took notice. A few exchanged glances, whispering among themselves. Rick didn't catch what they were saying. He was too busy straightening his tie, checking his watch, and preparing for his next high-profile meeting. He had no idea that this quiet, unassuming man was about to turn his entire world upside down. The bank hummed with quiet efficiency, keyboards clicking, hushed conversations about investments and market trends. The occasional clinking of fine china from the executive lounge. Rick Gallagher stood near his office door, speaking with a client, when his gaze flicked toward the front counter. The older man, the one Rick had barely noticed when he walked in, was now standing at the teller's desk. His posture was relaxed but assured, his hands resting lightly on the counter. Rick narrowed his eyes. Something about the man's presence unsettled him, though he couldn't quite place why. Then he saw it. A check. A large one. The teller, a young employee named Daniel, held the piece of paper in his hands, his eyes subtly widening as he read the amount. Rick frowned and took a step closer. He wasn't sure why, but a flicker of irritation sparked inside him. Daniel hesitated before speaking. "Sir, this is a rather large deposit." The older man simply nodded. "Yes, I'd like to deposit it into my account." His voice was smooth, measured. There was no arrogance, no impatience. But there was something else. A quiet confidence that didn't need to demand respect because it had already earned it. Rick didn't like that. Without thinking, he strode forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. "Excuse me," Rick interjected smoothly, stepping behind the counter. "I'll take it from here." Daniel, clearly relieved, handed over the check and stepped back. Rick took a moment to glance at the piece of paper. His eyes skimmed over the details. 6 figures, an account number, and a signature. But he wasn't looking at the numbers. He was looking at the name. He didn't recognize it. And that was enough for suspicion to curl in his chest. Rick set the check down and met the man's gaze with a carefully controlled expression. His artificial smile, the one he reserved for moments like this, slid into place. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, voice polite but firm. "But I can't process this deposit without further verification." The man didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "Verification?" he repeated, his tone unreadable. Rick gave a small shrug, slipping his hands into his pockets as if the matter was already settled. "Clients of a certain level are required to meet our standards." For the first time, the man's expression shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't offense. It was something far more unsettling. Amusement. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Standards," he mused. "You mean like trust?" Rick's smile tightened. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Let's be honest," he said just above a whisper. "People walk in here all the time trying to cash checks that don't belong to them. It's our job to ensure legitimacy." There. A carefully veiled accusation. Subtle, yet cutting. Still, the man didn't react the way Rick expected. Instead, he slid the check back across the counter with an almost lazy motion. "If legitimacy is the issue," he said, voice calm, "why not verify the check? Or is there something else at play?" The words landed like a sharp pinprick against Rick's carefully constructed authority. He stiffened, his grip tightening just slightly against the counter's edge. "I'm afraid we have the right to refuse service," Rick said, straightening his posture. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave, sir." The room had gone silent. A few employees exchanged nervous glances, sensing the tension. Some of the wealthier clients had turned their attention toward the scene, murmuring among themselves. Rick ignored them. He had made his decision. For a long moment, the man simply studied him. Then, slowly, deliberately, he chuckled again. It wasn't loud. It wasn't mocking. But it held something dangerous. Something that sent a flicker of unease through Rick's chest. The man shook his head, tucking his hands into his pockets. "Interesting choice," he murmured. Rick barely had time to process the words before the man turned, walking toward the exit with slow, steady strides. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. But just before he stepped out the door, he paused, turned his head just slightly, and gave Rick one final look. A look that said, "You might want to remember this moment." Then, he was gone. And Rick had no idea he had just made the worst mistake of his career. Rick returned to his office, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. Another situation handled. Another questionable individual sent on his way. He settled into his leather chair, exhaling as he glanced at his computer screen. He barely noticed Daniel, the young teller, still standing near the counter, looking uneasy. "Something wrong, Daniel?" Rick asked, not bothering to look up. Daniel hesitated. "Sir, I think that man was..." Rick waved a dismissive hand. "If you're about to tell me I made a mistake, save it." Daniel pressed his lips together but didn't argue. Rick leaned back in his chair, already moving on. This was his bank, his domain. He had built his career on reading people, on maintaining the standards that kept this institution pristine. The man who had just walked out, he was nobody. Then, the door to his office swung open. Linda Williams, the bank's regional director, stood there, her face pale. Rick frowned. "Linda? What's the..." She marched toward his desk, her heels clicking against the floor. Without a word, she tossed her phone onto his desk. Rick blinked, glancing down. The screen was open to a news article. A headline in bold letters stared back at him. Morgan Freeman denied service at high-end bank. Was it racial profiling? Rick's stomach clenched. Slowly, his eyes drifted to the image beneath the headline. Morgan Freeman, standing outside his bank, shaking his head. Rick's breath caught in his throat. His hands, which had been resting calmly on the desk, tensed into fists. He felt the blood drain from his face as his brain scrambled to process the realization. That was Morgan Freeman, he rasped. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. You tell me. Rick grabbed the phone, scrolling through the article, his eyes scanning the words in rapid panic. Hollywood legend Morgan Freeman, known for his iconic roles in films such as The Shawshank Redemption and Driving Miss Daisy, was denied service at Everton Grand Bank earlier today. Sources report that the actor was refused a routine deposit by bank manager Rick Gallagher, raising questions about racial bias in elite financial institutions. Rick felt his mouth go dry. The name. He hadn't recognized the name on the check. But now, the face on the screen. It was unmistakable. He had just humiliated one of the most respected men in the world. And now, the entire world knew it. Rick looked up at Linda, his jaw tightening. How bad is it? Linda exhaled sharply, crossing her arms. It's spreading like wildfire. Every news outlet is picking it up. Twitter, Instagram, even the late-night talk shows are already making jokes about it. Rick clenched his teeth. It's just a misunderstanding. Linda slammed her hands down on his desk, making him flinch. No, Rick. It's not just a misunderstanding, it's a disaster. She yanked the phone out of his hands, scrolling. Do you have any idea what kind of damage you've done? The media isn't just talking about the check. They're talking about this bank, about you. People are calling for boycotts. Investors are asking questions. Rick forced himself to stay calm, to maintain control. We'll issue a statement. Say it was a simple mistake. Linda let out a humorless laugh. A mistake? She shook her head. Rick, you looked at a black man, saw his worn shoes, and assumed he didn't belong here. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. His pulse pounded in his ears. He wasn't racist. He wasn't. He was just doing his job, wasn't he? Linda sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Corporate is already on my back about this. And that's not even the worst part. Rick stared at her. What do you mean? She hesitated, just for a second, before handing him another piece of paper, a purchase agreement. Rick's brow furrowed as he scanned the words. Then, his stomach dropped. Morgan Freeman just bought the bank. Rick's grip on the paper tightened. His breath came in short, uneven bursts. What? His voice was barely a whisper. Linda's expression was unreadable. Morgan Freeman didn't just take the insult and walk away, Rick, she paused. He owns us now. The air in the room felt suffocating. Rick's entire career, his power, his influence, it had all just been yanked out from under him. And the man he had so carelessly dismissed? He was now his boss. Rick sat frozen in his office chair, gripping the purchase agreement as if it might dissolve in his hands. His mind struggled to grasp what had just happened. Morgan Freeman now owned the bank. The man he had humiliated, dismissed like a common fraud, had turned around and bought the entire institution out from under him. Rick swallowed hard. How is this even possible? Linda exhaled, crossing her arms. Because he's Morgan Freeman, Rick. Her voice was laced with exhaustion. He's a man who spent decades building wealth, respect, and influence. Unlike you, he doesn't need to prove he belongs. He already does. Rick clenched his jaw. What does this mean for me? Linda hesitated, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. Pity, maybe. Or maybe just quiet resignation. He's in the boardroom, she finally said. He wants to speak with you. Rick's pulse pounded in his ears. This couldn't be happening. But it was. And there was no way out of it. The journey from his office to the boardroom had never felt this long before. Every step Rick took felt heavier. His stomach twisted into knots. He could feel the eyes of the staff on him, tellers, advisors, even the janitorial crew. Some looked away quickly. Others watched with something close to amusement. For years, he had walked these halls with a quiet authority, his polished shoes clicking confidently against the marble floors. Now, he felt like a condemned man marching to his own execution. As he approached the boardroom doors, he hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, he pushed them open. And there he was. Morgan Freeman sat at the head of the long, mahogany table, exuding an effortless authority that Rick could never fake. He wasn't dressed like a CEO. No expensive suit, no silk tie. Just a simple, well-pressed button-down shirt and a quiet presence that commanded the room. Rick felt his throat tighten. Every board member was present. Some avoided his gaze. Others simply looked disappointed. Morgan glanced up, meeting Rick's eyes with that same unreadable expression he had worn at the counter earlier. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Morgan leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His voice, slow and measured, cut through the silence like a blade. "Mr. Gallagher," he said, "have a seat." Rick sat down stiffly, keeping his posture straight, as if holding on to the last remnants of his dignity. Morgan studied him for a moment, tapping his fingers against the table. "You look uncomfortable," Morgan finally said. Rick forced a thin smile. "It's an unusual situation." Morgan chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Unusual. That's one way to put it." Rick swallowed, his palms damp against the polished wood. Morgan leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Tell me, Mr. Gallagher, do you remember what you said to me at the counter?" Rick's throat went dry. He hesitated. Morgan nodded. "Let me remind you." He rested his elbows on the table, clasping his hands. His voice dropped, mimicking Rick's condescending tone. "People walk in here all the time trying to cash checks that don't belong to them." Rick flinched. Morgan tilted his head slightly. "And what was it that made you think I was one of those people?" Rick opened his mouth, then closed it. He could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. Morgan didn't break eye contact. Rick shifted in his chair. "It was just protocol." Morgan let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "No, Mr. Gallagher. Protocol would have been verifying the check. You didn't even try." Rick had no response. Morgan leaned back again, tapping the armrest of his chair. "Tell me, if I had walked in here wearing a $1,000 suit, if my shoes had been Italian leather, would you have treated me the same way?" Rick's pulse pounded. The truth sat between them, thick and suffocating. And for the first time, Rick felt it. He had judged him, instantly, without hesitation, not because of the check, but because of who he assumed Morgan was. And now, he was paying the price. Morgan exhaled, as if he had reached his decision. "You made a mistake, Mr. Gallagher." His voice was calm, but there was a quiet edge to it. "A mistake rooted in something deeper than policy, and I could fire you for it. In fact, I probably should." Rick tensed. "But," Morgan continued, tapping his fingers against the table, "I'm going to offer you a choice." Rick's breath caught. Morgan's eyes bore into him. "You can resign today. Walk away. Leave this place and never look back." Rick's fingers curled against his lap. "Or," Morgan said, "you can stay." Rick blinked. "Stay." Morgan nodded. "Under one condition." Rick leaned forward slightly, desperate to grasp onto anything that might salvage his career. Morgan's next words cut through him like a blade. "You will work under me," he said simply, "and you will learn." Rick stared. "You will learn about the communities you've ignored," Morgan continued. You will learn about the people you've dismissed. You will understand, firsthand, what it means to be on the other side of that counter." The room was deathly silent. Morgan leaned back, folding his arms. "So, what's it going to be, Mr. Gallagher?" Rick swallowed hard, his pride warring with reality. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one making the rules. The silence in the boardroom stretched, thick and suffocating. Every eye was on Rick, waiting for his answer. He could feel the sweat gathering at the back of his neck, the tightness in his chest. Resign or stay? Walk away in disgrace or stay and swallow his pride? Rick had spent his entire career building himself into a man of control. He read people. He managed people. But today, he was the one being judged, the one being measured. And for the first time, he felt what it was like to be on the other side of that judgment. Finally, he cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was hoarse. "I'll stay." Morgan didn't react immediately. He simply studied Rick, his fingers tapping against the armrest of his chair. Then, with a slow nod, he leaned forward. "Good," he said simply. Rick exhaled, though it didn't bring relief, because deep down he knew his real work was just beginning. The next morning, Rick walked into the bank as usual, but nothing felt the same. For the first time in his career, his presence didn't command respect. Staff members didn't rush to greet him. Some whispered behind his back. Others barely acknowledged him at all. Word had spread. The once feared bank manager had been put in his place, and everyone was watching to see what would happen next. Linda met him at his office door, arms crossed. "How does it feel?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. Rick swallowed. "Like I'm walking into a lion's den," Linda smirked. "Well, maybe now you'll know what it's like for people who don't fit the image you used to respect so much." Rick didn't argue. He couldn't, because she was right. At exactly 10 a.m., Rick was summoned to Morgan's office. It was strange seeing someone else in that chair, the seat of power he had once occupied. Morgan sat behind the massive mahogany desk, calm as always. His presence filled the room effortlessly, despite his lack of arrogance. "Sit," he said simply. Rick obeyed. Morgan glanced down at a folder on the desk. "Tell me, Mr. Gallagher," he said, flipping it open. "How many minority clients have been denied service in this bank over the last 5 years?" Rick blinked. I don't know." Morgan looked up. "Find out." Rick hesitated. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Morgan leaned forward slightly. "I want a full audit. Every rejection, every questionable case. I want to know who we've turned away and why." Rick stiffened. "That could take weeks," Morgan nodded. "Then I suggest you get started." Rick exhaled, rubbing his temple. "And what happens when we find those numbers?" Morgan's gaze sharpened. "Then, Mr. Gallagher, we'll figure out how to fix it." Rick spent the next several days combing through years of records, scanning rejection logs, reviewing complaints. And the numbers were worse than he had expected. Time and time again, minority clients had been subtly pushed out, given extra hurdles, denied service for reasons that were technically legal, but undeniably unfair. He found cases that made his stomach twist. A black business owner who had been asked for additional proof of income, despite having a higher balance than most clients. A Hispanic man who had been forced to wait weeks for a loan approval that should have been automatic. A young black woman who had simply been told, "We can't help you," without explanation. Case after case. Page after page. And Rick began to realize this wasn't just about him. It was about something much bigger. A week later, Rick found himself standing at the front of the conference room, presenting his findings to Morgan and the board. His hands felt clammy. His throat was dry. Because he wasn't just reading numbers, he was exposing himself. "These statistics," he said, clearing his throat, "show a pattern of bias in our institution. One that I contributed to." Morgan watched him carefully, saying nothing. Rick exhaled. "It's not just bad policy, it's wrong." He met Morgan's gaze. "And I want to fix it." A long silence. Then, slowly, Morgan nodded. "Good," he said. "Then let's get to work." Months passed. Under Morgan's leadership, the bank transformed. New policies were put in place to ensure fairness. Training programs were launched to unlearn biases. The staff became more diverse, more inclusive. And Rick? Rick changed. He no longer ruled with silent judgment. He listened. He learned. And one day, months later, he found himself at the counter, standing where Morgan had once stood. A young black man approached, nervously holding a check. Rick took it, scanning the amount. He met the man's eyes. "Welcome to Everton Grand Bank," he said, his voice steady. "How can I help you today?" And for the first time, he meant it. The years passed. Morgan Freeman remained a guiding force in the bank's transformation, but eventually he stepped back, leaving the institution in the hands of those he had trained. Rick, once the face of quiet discrimination, became something else entirely. A man who understood what it meant to truly see people. A man who had learned. Sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. And that respect, it isn't given. It isn't bought. It's earned. Guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. Let us know about your thoughts in the comment section. Also subscribe the channel for daily stories notification.